I'm Stephanie Ruhle with a lot to cover today, starting with Omarosa, who is not holding back. The former White House aide calling out President Trump just moments ago.
Do you think he's mentally competent to do this job?
No, I don't think he's fit.
The Trump administration firing back after Omarosa reveals she made secret recordings of White House officials, including the president himself.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw on the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
Changing his tune, Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, now says President Trump did not talk about Michael Flynn with former FBI Director Jim Comey.
What happened in that conversation with Comey about Michael Flynn? What exactly did President Trump say?
There was no conversation about Michael Flynn.
And our tax cut tracker is back. Stock buybacks topping $1 trillion, and companies have no idea what to do with all that extra cash. We begin this morning with secret tapes. Again, allegations of racism, and the White House now in a PR war with Omarosa, the former reality show contestant turned White House aide. The president once said Omarosa always promises and delivers high drama. Well, he was not kidding. I have a great team here to break all of this down, but first, I want to lay out what we know. This morning, the White House is dealing with two different PR problems. The first surrounds the content of these new secretly recorded tapes of Omarosa talking to the president and White House officials like John Kelly. The second is the fact that these tapes were recorded at all. Now, as for the first issue, we are now hearing the conversations Omarosa hinted at in her new book, specifically Chief of Staff John Kelly firing her in the Situation Room last December, and the phone call in which the president appears to hear about it for the first time.
I think it's important to understand that if we make this a friendly departure, we can all be, you can look at your time here in the White House as a year of service to the nation. And then you can go on without any type of difficulty in the future relative to your reputation.
Can I ask you a couple of questions? Is the president aware of what's going on?
Let's not go down the road. This is a non-negotiable discussion.
I don't want to negotiate. I've never had a chance to talk to you, General Kelly.
Yeah,
so if this is my departure, I'd like to have at least an opportunity to understand.
We can talk another time. This has to do with some pretty serious integrity violations. So I'll let it go at that. So the staff and everyone on the staff works for me, not the president.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw on the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
No, nobody even told me about it. Nobody.
Wow.
They run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn it. I don't love you leaving at all.
Interestingly, while that tape implies the president knew nothing about her firing, Omarosa said she now believes he did know, but may have instructed John Kelly to fire her so he could, quote, keep his hands clean. We should point out that NBC has not been able to listen to the full recording of that conversation, and we have not gotten a response from the White House yet. Of course, the administration is now rightly concerned that there could be a whole lot more tapes with more secretly recorded conversations. After the initial recordings of John Kelly was played on Meet the Press, the administration responded with some very harsh words. Quote, the very idea that a staff member would sneak a recording device into the White House Situation Room shows a blatant disregard for our national security, and then to brag about it on national television further proves the lack of character and integrity of this disgruntled former White House employee. Omarosa defended herself on NBC's Meet the Press.
Because this is a White House where everybody lies. The president lies to the American people. Sarah Huckabee stands in front of the country and lies every single day. You have to have your own back, because otherwise you'll look back and you'll see 17 knives in your back.
I'm reminded of one of the president's most famous quotes, how he always brings the best people. I want to bring in NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. She's in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. Okay, Kelly, at this point, how exactly is the administration responding to this? Because to Omarosa's point, if it was simply her word against theirs, they'd call her a liar and move on. But with these tapes, it poses a very different threat.
It does, and one of the things they've seized upon is the location of her dismissal inside the Situation Room. We've not gotten an answer as to why such a secure facility was used to discipline or to separate from an employee. That seems a bit unusual when the chief of staff has one of the largest offices in the White House complex. So they are able to now make it a national security or a security protocol issue and one of character. One of the interesting things will be in the additional tapes that she claims to have, when do these recordings start? Having covered the Trump administration since the beginning, there were plenty of times when Omarosa Manigault Newman appeared to be blending in with the team, happy to serve, a much different sort of, at least kind of forward expression of her time in the White House. So when did she begin doing this? A lot of her fame, of course, has come from being a reality TV villain on the show Apprentice and others. And she is very, very good at using the best tools in her disposal. And this, of course, bringing recordings is one way to bring her bit of proof, as she would like to say. She now refers to herself as a whistleblower. So some of the craft that she learned from reality television in the Donald Trump orbit brought to the White House. The White House, not sure how much more there is, although one might argue that she would have brought the biggest, most explosive type tapes out first, involving the chief of staff and the president. And now she's saying, I've got more and I can protect myself. Here's more of Omarosa Manigault Newman.
I have protections. The moment that I've decided to blow the whistle on a lot of the corruption going on in the White House, there are protections that are afforded to me. So let's be clear. The things that General Kelly is doing in this White House should concern all Americans.
So she is trying to make the argument about the president's fitness to serve, the structure of the White House, and the truthfulness of the White House. And the White House pushing back is saying an employee who would do this should not be trusted. Steph?
A reality TV show villain versus another reality TV show villain. This is where we are. Welcome to 2018. I want to bring in my panel. It is an excellent one today. My friend Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com, and Brett Stevens is with us, op-ed columnist with the New York Times. Brett, I turn to you first. Do these tapes help Omarosa's credibility?
No, and we may as well bring out our checkbooks right now and write checks to the Trump 2020 campaign by giving her the time that she's clearly asking for. Because I think if anyone has less credibility than Donald Trump, it's actually probably Omarosa. There's so many things to say about this White House right now. There are so many credible charges that can be laid at its feet in terms of the way it's dealt with race relations and in terms of the way it's dealt with foreign policy, our allies. You go down a list. But when people who are probably watching the show, maybe not well inclined toward the Trump administration, wonder where his base of support comes from, it comes from giving as much credibility to a person who has as little credibility as Omarosa.
But no one is giving Omarosa credibility. Nobody is saying she's a good guy or she's honest. But Omarosa has known the president since 2004. She worked with him on The Apprentice. She was inside the White House as a senior official for over a year.
That is the more terrifying fact about the Trump administration, that she was in it for as long as she was.
Then let that terrifying character, whether they're telling the truth or not, tell that story. That's a person who's actually inside, and we're on the outside looking in, wondering if this is just madness or strategy.
Next to Jared Kushner and Ivanka, she probably knows him better than anybody else in the White House. So to that degree, she is credible. The fact that
she knows them. She did The Apprentice with Ivanka and Don Jr. and Eric.
She knows the family. She knows the business. She has flown on private jets with him long before this man was running for president. Omarosa, look, every time you go to court, right, sometimes you got to get a drug dealer to give information to another drug dealer. Everyone's not going to have a perfect background. But if there's somebody who can speak about how this White House operates, or even worse, and I think this is key, the fact that she was wandering in and out of the building and recording people and no one seemed to have a problem with it one way or another, it tells us how disorganized and how sloppy this place was. I find this compelling.
People had a problem with it. It's just so unorganized, they didn't know she was doing it.
Exactly. Sean Spicer was snatching people's cell phones last spring saying, we're going to stop all these leaks. Apparently, he never did that to Omarosa. So, look, I also think, and I know this, I've had conversations with her both on and off the record, she's a smart woman. She didn't get tapes just of her getting fired. I think that's probably what she's releasing now because it helps the books. I am quite confident when she's saying I'm protected, she probably has people on the record saying things that they could get in legal trouble.
But because she's smart doesn't mean she's honest.
Or maybe we're talking about someone who is seeking a moment of maximum publicity,
Which
and
she
we are
is.
giving her maximum airtime. There's tons of things going on in this country right now that ought to concern us, that serious people ought to be talking about. But instead, we're saying, look, Omarosa says X, Y, and Z about the president. If any of those things are not credible, it enhances the president's credibility among his defenders. And that's going to be the
To
consequence
that
of this
exact
discussion.
point, we're going back and forth whether or not Omarosa believes the president ever used the N-word. At one point, she said no. Now she's saying possibly. I would argue, does it actually matter? If you look at the president's history in terms of race relations, despite what Republicans may say, it's very bad. So are we wasting time or having the wrong debate on whether or not the president ever used that word?
I've never cared about whether or not the president uses the N-word. And I have said multiple times, I'm not even concerned if somebody's racist. I'm concerned about their policies. Not against the law to be racist. There are lots of racist people in this country. I think it's not an issue of giving her too much publicity. It's an issue of what does it represent about this administration that we have people like that working there. That is a valuable discussion. That is a discussion we can never talk too much about because it reveals how dangerous it is to be run by a bunch of incompetent TV show
Jason,
stars.
I could not agree with you more. The scandal of the Trump administration is that it brought the values and, in fact, the personnel of the Celebrity Apprentice into the White House apparatus. The scandal is that Omarosa didn't see anything the matter, apparently, with putting on her cell phone in the Situation Room. That's far more damning about what the Trump administration was in its first year, and I think continues to be today, than whatever salacious allegations Omarosa makes now. But I will say this. If it turns out she doesn't have a tape with Trump using the N-word, the administration will use that mercilessly to say all of my critics are making these outrageous allegations against me, and there's nothing to them, and they're all fraudulent, and you're just a bunch of you know, quote, libtards who make these crazy allegations that have no basis in fact, and this is how he wins re-election 2 years down the road.
Jason, where Brett makes an excellent point, you could have Omarosa up there today saying he's unhinged, he's unfit, and unless she has actual credible evidence where he has changed somehow in the last 18 months than when she took the job, Brett is exactly right. She's lumped into this other look at the liberal universe who now embrace their foe because it fit their narrative.
Well, I think the problem with that is you're preaching to the choir, right? Trump's people, the idea that, oh my gosh, this is going to strengthen his base, they already love him. It doesn't matter. Omarosa could come out with a proof of life that Donald Trump shot somebody, called them the N-word, and danced down the street and put it on YouTube, and they would say it was fake news. I mean, it's not like, this is not about changing his constituency. This is about the larger discussion in this country about how organized or disorganized our government is. I don't think in 6 months that this is going to matter that much. But if you're talking about your independent voters, if you're talking about people who are like, look, I don't care about this stuff, I just want an organized government, that's where this comes into play, because people are like, I don't want to hear about this every day. And clearly he doesn't know how to hire people, he doesn't know how to fire people, he doesn't know how to behave responsibly, and that's what this country needs to know. We can't talk about that enough.
Look, what I'm saying is, if you're going to say that the sky is falling, the sky had better fall, or otherwise people are not going to take you credibly. If you say the wolf is coming and the coyote only shows up, people will say it's once again an exaggeration. I'll never forget.
The coyote less dangerous than a
the
wolf?
coyote is very dangerous.
No,
okay?
I think the coyote is very dangerous.
I'll never forget when Hillary Clinton said, you know, why am I not ahead 50 points? Part of the reason is that they had
Hamptons in August?
Right. Well, I mean, exactly. Or Vineyard or wherever, the Vineyard. But, you know, part of the problem was Trump's opponents kept saying, this guy's going to be the worst thing that ever happened. And if he didn't quite live up to that standard of being the absolute worst, if he managed to string a coherent English sentence together, some part of the country says, once again, this is a crazy overreaction by people suffering from Trump derangement
Brett is
syndrome.
right. Not just some part of the country. Leading business leaders continue to say, ignore his tweets, look at the policy, forgetting the fact that the policy is damning to a huge portion of the country, actually a huge portion of his base.
And that's ultimately what ends up happening. Like I said, I don't think in 6 months it's going to be the issue.
But it doesn't end up happening because he wins this narrative.
But it doesn't matter if you're winning a narrative if people can't keep their jobs or they feel unsafe, or if Harley Davidson has to move, or if steel workers in Western Pennsylvania feel like their jobs aren't going to be secure. That ultimately is going to be the measure of this president. presidency, regardless of what Omarosa says. And the other thing is this, whether you're talking about the N-word or the mysterious tape that Michael Steele is talking about or anything else, what it also speaks to, I've said this before, we have an excellent economy right now on some levels, right? And this guy is still hovering in the low 40s. Why is that happening? Because of things like Omarosa, because of things like Sean Spicer, because people are feeling like, you know, I hired this guy to not be in this kind of drama.
Omarosa and Sean Spicer do not change anyone's votes.
I do think I think they change people's votes who voted for a guy who they thought was not going to get us into this kind of nonsense. They wanted a president who was just going to do business.
What happens is it merely convinces the president's supporters that the opponents of the president will use any hammer against him, including someone like Omarosa, who liberals were condemning in the strongest possible terms just a few months ago. Suddenly becomes a credible, yet another credible tribune about the awfulness of the president.
Omarosa is complicit in that she now says he's unhinged, he's unfit. She didn't quit. Okay? After Charlottesville, this was the one-year anniversary of Charlottesville. Yeah. What did she say after? Nothing. Yeah. Almost no one in the entire administration said anything. She never quit. She never spoke out. She was fired. So to Brett's point, can she really be used as a credible person? Can President Trump say, look, you will do anything to make your story work?
He can make that argument, and any Democrat who uses Omarosa to attack Donald Trump is an idiot. I think she's just operating in her own space, which is part of the overall swamp, which is damaging to this administration. And this is a key thing. When you talk about the N-word, and you're like, well, if she can't produce it, it doesn't matter. Because like I said, everyone believes he uses it. So it doesn't matter if she can prove that. It doesn't matter if she can demonstrate that he said something racist. Snatching babies from kids is 10 times worse than saying the N-word for a lot of different people in this country. So that's where I think this plays in. She becomes part of the overall dime, the overall drumbeat, that there's a mess in Washington, and that's not what people voted for.
We talked a lot about how much free airtime Donald Trump got, which boosted his credibility moving into 2016. We're giving free airtime to a witness who doesn't deserve it. There's so many things that you and I ought to be talking about at this table. I can't believe we're talking about Omarosa.
Flint still doesn't have clean water, but I was tweeting that this morning.
But there you go. There you go.
Flint doesn't have clean water. It cost $55 million for new pipes there, and $8 billion, I think, is what the president is looking for the Space Force. I'm going to make one last point. 83% of Republicans approve of President Trump's handling of racial issues compared to 10% of Democrats. That's a CBS poll. So we can debate all day long on whether or not the president used the N-word. 83% of Republicans think he is A-OK in terms of race relations. All right, we're going to leave it there. And guess what? I know what Brett is going to be doing at 11 o'clock. He's going to be watching my partner, Ali Velshi, and I interview Omarosa live right here on MSNBC. Whatever you're doing after this, you know, I'm going to let you stay here. You can take notes because I know you want to see it. You can stay right here. All right, coming up, the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, changing his story once again, now saying Trump never spoke to Jim Comey about Michael Flynn. Huh? But first, you have got to see this video. Hundreds of people joined hands along Florida's Gulf Coast this weekend, raising serious concerns about the recent algae crisis plaguing the beaches there. They're protesting toxic green algae that is being released from Lake Okeechobee that has been associated with killing large numbers of fish and causing respiratory problems for people. It has also caused damage to homes and beaches. We're going to stay on this story. It's an important one.
What happened in that conversation with Comey about Michael Flynn? What exactly did President Trump say?
There was no conversation about Michael Flynn.
So you're saying that President Trump and James Comey never discussed Michael Flynn?
That is what he will testify to if he's asked that question. They already know that. So why are they asking us for him to repeat what they already know under oath?
And you're also saying that a month ago you didn't tell ABC News that he said something along the lines of can you give him a break?
No, I did not. I said that is what Comey says.
Oh, goodness gracious. That was President Trump's lawyer, the one and only Rudy Giuliani, claiming the president never spoke to former FBI Director Jim Comey about Michael Flynn. But just last month, this is how the president's very same attorney described the conversation between Trump and Comey.
The reality is Comey, in some ways, ends up being a good witness for us.
How is he a good witness for the president if he's saying that the president was asking him, directing him, in his words, to let the Michael Flynn investigation go?
He didn't direct him to do that. What he said to him was, can you give him a break?
Comey says he...
I want to bring in Seth Waxman. He's an SEC enforcement attorney and a former federal prosecutor. Okay, Seth, I don't even understand this. Rudy Giuliani directly contradicting himself. Now, one could say he's trying to muddy the waters, but what does this do to the investigation? Are there any consequences for the president or Rudy Giuliani that he's straight up lying either then or now?
Well, I don't think a sitting president's ever going to be indicted, so there may be some ramifications if there were ever impeachment proceedings and Mr. Giuliani and Mr. Trump were put to the test. But as we also heard Mr. Giuliani saying, he's arguing in the alternative. And to me, he's arguing a reality, a false reality. His statements don't seem to be tied to the law or the facts. He seems to say whatever comes to mind at any given moment that's expedient at that moment. And I can tell you that's very confusing for the American people. I'll just give you a quick example. I had a murder trial once where the defense lawyer stood up all trial and said his client didn't commit the murder. He was across town. He has an alibi. And then in closing arguments, he said, but if he was on the scene and he did shoot the victim, it was self-defense. That's a very confusing thing for a jury to digest. And I, as the prosecutor, stood up and said, look, even the defense lawyer is saying his client was on the scene. So these kinds of arguments routinely fail in the court of law, and I think these will fail in the court of public opinion as well.
But how are they going to play into the investigation? Are they? I mean, Robert Mueller's got to be watching this.
Sure, he's watching it, but I don't know that he really cares about it. He's focusing on his investigation. And, in my opinion, if this ever goes to an impeachment proceeding, Mr. Trump needs to keep 34 Republican senators on his side. It takes 2/3 of the Senate to remove Mr. Trump from office. So I think Mr. Giuliani's strategy, if there is one, is to continue playing to that Republican base. Hopefully that translates in his mind to 34 Republican senators. He continues to poll in that 30 to 40% range. And if he wins that battle, then he walks. Then he remains president, and there's no removal from office.
All right, this morning, Giuliani again spoke about how Mueller needs to wrap up this investigation by September. Listen.
He should put out his report, tell the American people what he has, and they can evaluate it. They're entitled to this information before he shouldn't hold it and try to manipulate the election the way Comey did. I don't think he wants to do that. So why did I say September 1st? Because a long time ago, 2 months ago, when we met with him, he threw out September 1st as a date that he might be able to get the report done by.
So let's just remind our audience, Benghazi investigation took over 4 years. Hillary Clinton's email took over 2 years. No indictments. The Mueller investigation, the Mueller probe, at this point, the full list of known indictments and plea deals is 35. What do you think Rudy Giuliani is getting at? And do you believe him when he says at one point, Team Mueller said September 1st, they'd be ready to go?
I think that's wishful thinking on his part. I would be hesitant to believe that Mr. Mueller would put kind of a marker down like that, knowing how kind of complex investigations take and how long they take. And to your point, other investigations go on very long. This is a fairly short window of time, given the gravity and the complexity of this investigation. And frankly, one of the 2 or 3 big things that I still think needs to happen in this investigation is that the Mueller team needs to take a run at some of the potential key cooperators, people like Paul Manafort. So if that trial were to result in a conviction, they may have a shot at bringing him into the fold and using that as well. So there's going to be a long period of time before this investigation wraps up.
All right, Seth, thanks so much. I'm glad you're here by our side while we're covering it. Coming up, if you've got any plans to run for president, there is one place you've got to be. Find out who's making the rounds at the Iowa State Fair and what voters there think that those possible candidates should be talking about. We'll have that next. Welcome back. Time now for your morning primer. Everything you need to know to get your day started. We begin in the state of Virginia, where prosecutors in Paul Manafort's tax and bank fraud trial are expected to rest their case today. A verdict could come as early as this week. A Baltimore police officer caught on camera repeatedly punching a man has officially resigned. Police say the officer was working a, quote, special cross-borders crime initiative. The man he punched was treated for injuries and released without charge. The incident, no surprise, is under investigation. And authorities in Washington state have recovered the flight data recorder and human remains from a plane stolen by an airline worker at SeaTac Airport. He performed dangerous acrobatic stunts before crashing into a remote island. And some very frightening moments in Spain, where more than 300 people were injured after a pier collapsed at a music festival. 9 were taken to the hospital. 1 remains in serious condition. And financial turmoil in Turkey could have ripple effects globally as the nation's currency plunges after the U.S. imposed tariffs on Turkey's aluminum and steel on Friday. Let's get more now from CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Leisman. All right, Steve, markets are up slightly right now, but I want to go through if and why this is a long-term concern, because early days, people were concerned that President Trump was too cozy with an autocratic leader like Erdogan. And now suddenly we're saying, wait a minute, we can't be so tough on them. But is the issue not whether he likes or not Erdogan, but what the president, the administration's long-term strategy is here?
I think that's an issue, and I think you raise a good point, because all of this takes place against a backdrop of a United States that doesn't feel the need anymore to be the stabilizer for the world. There were things that maybe presidents in the past wanted to do, but they didn't do because it might destabilize the world. Now, the United States has better growth going forward and maybe a better capitalized banking system, but there's two issues that seem to be driving this. In the first instance, it's a stronger U.S. dollar, and that's Federal Reserve raising interest rates while other countries are kind of far behind our recovery here. And the second one are these tariffs and retaliatory tariffs that create issues for countries, especially that have bad debt problems. Turkey's problems essentially are its own, but we're rubbing a little salt in the wounds here, perhaps.
And how's the market going to take this? Because there's always been concern that a trade war could result in a currency war, and we talk about it often. Remember, Trump loves to say that China is a currency manipulator, and we have watched the yuan move a lot in the last 2 months.
You know, that's exactly right, Stephanie, and it's a great point, because the issue is that once we put up tariffs, other countries' currencies decline, and so their products get to be less expensive, and it offsets the tariffs. So that's when you had President Trump complaining about the Federal Reserve and saying, you guys are raising interest rates too much, which are raising the value of the dollar and essentially offsetting the tariffs that are out there. So it's very easy for a tariff war to become a currency war. It creates more risk for the markets. The markets fell 200 points on Friday on the Dow. We're back to being sort of even today. There's not a sense right now of the kind of concern about contagion we had around Greece, at least not yet. What we have right now, Stephanie, are separate fires, and it's not a single conflagration at this point yet.
All right, Steve, thank you so much. I just want to put it in perspective. If people would have bought Bitcoin at the beginning of the year instead of the lira, they actually would have lost more today. So things are certainly
I
volatile.
didn't know that.
See, there you go. All right, now we got to turn to more than 1 million people expected to make their way to Des Moines for the annual Iowa State Fair. I would love just to eat there. It is more than just a fun place to try some insane carnival eats, maybe a few rides. This fair also serves as a very popular venue for candidates testing the water for a potential presidential run, trying out their message in the state scheduled to hold the first vote of the 2020 presidential election. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard went to the fair to see what voters are thinking about. All right, Vaughn, go to the voters first. What did you hear from people?
Yeah, good morning, Stephanie. I think it's an important exercise. You know, oftentimes people look at and they kind of give an eye roll as to why are these candidates, you know, more than 2 years out from the presidential election coming here to Des Moines, Iowa. But what I believe, and it's not only healthy for them, but it's also healthy for us, because you have Des Moines, you have city folks, but you also have from rural Iowa, people that are coming in here. And constantly, I'm going to play you some of the sound that we got here over the weekend when we asked the question to voters, what is the most pressing issue on your mind? What did we not hear? Donald Trump, Democrats, or Omarosa? This is what they told us.
I'm concerned most about how our allies look at us now, you know, and the disrespect that we're showing the world.
Climate change, because it affects all of us.
I'd say our economy right now and our minimum wage here.
Economy.
Is it working for you?
Well, I'm a rancher, so it's tough.
Affordable housing. I think it's out of control. I think it's personally greedy.
Probably healthcare.
Cost of medical, cost of, you know, the insurance, and then it goes up. The hospital costs go up.
Immigration.
Why?
Because I care about people. That's pretty much all it matters. All it boils down to for me.
Probably women's rights, the right to choose.
Good paying jobs as opposed to minimum wage type jobs.
Well, I picked three things, and that's healthcare, education, and the deficit. And that's who I vote for.
Is either party addressing those? adequately right now for you?
I think they're trying. I think they're trying, and I think they each have different ways of doing it. And if it gets done, I don't really care which way they do it.
Economically, we do the best job in the world of raising crops. I'd like to be able to sell them to whomever we want.
The tariffs are having an impact on you.
They are.
Stephanie, when you hear conversations like rural health care, access to broadband, after all of those responses, it's hard to understand or to know whether they consider themselves Republicans, Democrats, Independents, because for a lot of these people, it comes down to local issues. I'll remind you, Iowa in the presidential election, it was a 15-point swing from 2012 to 2016 in order to go over to the Republicans. You've also got a lot of local races. The governor's races here, they have competitive congressional races, and it oftentimes comes down to those very local issues. Stephanie?
Very local issues, and people were certainly covering those there. Vaughn, I'm looking at that corn dog stand behind you. Please go there. Get one for me. One of my favorite treats.
I had one last night.
They're the best. You very rarely have an opportunity to have a corn dog, so when one is available, it's like a fish taco. You got to get it. Coming up, companies sitting on so much cash, they don't know what to do with it. Here's an idea. Pay your workers more. So what happened to the Republican promises that tax cuts would lead to higher wages and more jobs? Money, power, politics next. But first, we are keeping track of gun violence in the United States. There have now been 35,692 incidents of gun violence in the United States this year. 432 took place over the weekend. Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Ruhle. It is now time for Money, Power, Politics. Small wage gains for U.S. workers are being wiped out by cost of living increases. According to newly released numbers from the Labor Department, inflation was up 2.9% from July 2017 to July 2018, outpacing the 2.7% increase in wages during the same period. Meanwhile, U.S. companies are on track to reach or exceed $1 trillion in stock buybacks this year alone, with many crediting the $1.5 trillion tax cut. So instead of the promised higher wages and massive investments, companies are flush with cash and putting that money towards record buybacks, which of course boosts the price of their own stock, which helps shareholders. And many, many companies have workers that don't own a single share of the company. Joining me now, my dear friend Brendan Greeley, U.S. editor at the FT's Alphaville. Okie doke, Brendan. Part of the promise with the tax bill was going to be the increase in wages. We talked about families having $4,000 more money a year. But even if you get that $4,000 more, then the situation we face with inflation, whether it's Trump's fault or not, and it's not, wipes out that $4,000.
Well, so the $4,000 was always a bank shot, Steph. The first thing that's going to have to happen is that companies are going to have to invest in new plants and equipment. We had a good first quarter. They actually did that. We had a good growth number on business investment. It wasn't as good in the second quarter. So we're going to have to wait basically to the end of the year to see what kind of spending plans they have on buying, new plants and equipment so they can hire people or make their workers more productive. So, we're waiting, unfortunately, for the wage hike. So whatever you see on wages, you can't really necessarily connect it to the tax cut. The problem right now is we have the continuation of the story on wages. Workers don't seem to have enough bargaining power, even in this market, even with unemployment this low, to get their wages up. So that story is an old story. It hasn't changed. You and I have been talking about it for about 2 years. What is new is the inflation. In theory, a little bit of inflation, the kind we have right now, is a good thing. The Federal Reserve has been desperately trying to create this much inflation for 4 or 5 years. So the fact that real wages, so wages after you account for inflation, are going down is sort of not something that we can necessarily lay at the feet of Donald Trump. We can say that nothing has really changed. Workers don't seem to have any more bargaining power to get raises.
But Mr. Greeley, unless, along with the tax cut, some regulation that could have, let's say, addressed the disparity between worker and CEO pay, how could the administration have ever made the argument that trickle down was going to work? CEOs of companies, whether you think they're good guys or bad guys, their priorities, their stakeholders are their shareholders and customers. Nothing has changed in terms of their workers having more leverage. So if a CEO's job is to optimize the company's performance and make the most money, no one is forcing their hand to raise wages higher. So of course the tax cuts would go to buybacks.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I do think that, we tell ourselves a comforting tale using traditional economics. Traditional classic economics tells us that if companies get money, they're going going to spend it on investments. The investments are going to lead to wage rises. The problem is those models they make a lot of assumptions. And one of the assumptions they make is that workers have enough bargaining power with their employers. That's not true. And that's true for 100 different structural reasons. It has to do with, fewer unions. It has to do with, arbitration clauses. It has to do with a million different things. And we haven't addressed those at all. Congress needs to take that up. And I haven't seen any spark of Congress even thinking about these issues, either party, really, to be honest. To buybacks, we are on record pace. It's eye-watering, the numbers that we're looking at this year. So Goldman Sachs and Bernstein both estimate, notes came out last week, that we're going to get $1 trillion in buybacks. That is a staggering number. That's twice what we got last year. But as you point out, buybacks are a longer story, right? We have the tax cuts. We have the repatriation from abroad from this year that's actually increasing the buybacks. That's what's giving us this $1 trillion number. But buybacks are a longer story. They're a 10-year-old story where it's been more efficient for companies to give money back to shareholders than it has been to invest in new stuff. So I don't know. How do we get them to invest in new stuff? Your guess is as good as mine. I'm out of ideas.
It's efficient, and we're saying companies are not responsible for the hollowing out of America, and they're not responsible for helping retrain those workers. Then the question is, who is? Mr. Ruhle, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining me this morning.
Thanks, Steph.
Tax Cut Tracker, we're going to stay on it here. Coming up, 1 year after the violence in Charlottesville, another Unite the Right rally. This time, it fizzles. But while the crowd was smaller, has the sentiment in the country changed at all? Deadly riots in Charlottesville. The second Unite the Right rally took place in Washington, D.C. over the weekend. Only this time, there were less than 24 white nationalists gathering just steps away from the White House, far fewer than the 400 organizers planned for. While white supremacists and the alt-right gathered in D.C., hundreds marched in Charlottesville, and dozens of students, clergy members, and anti-fascists gathered to pay their respects to Heather Heyer, the woman who lost her life during last year's riots. Back with me to discuss, Jason Donson, who was in Charlottesville on Sunday, and Brett Stevens. All right, Jason, to you first. You were in Charlottesville, and some people are saying, well, a lot fewer people came. This is good news.
Right.
But is it good news after the white nationalists who participated last year got destroyed? They lost their jobs. They got kicked out of their apartment buildings. Should we take it as a positive sign that a lot less showed up? Or they're existing, they're just remaining in the shadows?
Yeah, they're existing, they're remaining in the shadows. I was in Charlottesville on Saturday for the memorial, and then I was actually at the march on Sunday in Washington, D.C. And so what happened is, a lot of the guys who went last year, they lost their jobs, but what they also recognized is that they didn't have to face the consequences that they thought they were going to face last year. I mean, think about it. A lot of those guys who got caught, they weren't caught by the local police department. They were caught by activists. So they're like, you know what? We can still be white nationalists at home. We can still be weekend white nationalists. We can be Forever 21 Nazis and do whatever we want in Michigan and in Illinois and California where we want to be. We don't have to march anymore. And so I found it nice that only 12 people showed up, but these guys still feel empowered. They feel more empowered today than they did a year ago, and that's what's dangerous.
Oh, but still, clearly, I mean, look, if 400 had showed up, if 800 had showed up, we would be having a very different conversation. I think a much more anxious conversation. It does mean that at least
they don't feel
some healthy antibodies in this society are working. They don't feel they're not fearless. They understand that there are consequences for their beliefs, social ostracism, losing their jobs. You're not going to be able to eradicate what's in the human heart, but at least you can start to condition their behavior in a way that is less aggressively obnoxious. Because if this movement had continued to visibly rise, our problems would be that much greater.
It's a good point. I want to share what the president tweeted about the rally, saying the riots in Charlottesville a year ago resulted in senseless death and division. We must come together as a nation. I condemn all types of racism and acts of violence. Peace to all Americans. What do you make of it?
Yeah, that's just what white nationalists want to hear. All types of racism. No, we're talking about white supremacy and white nationalist racism. And when the president says all types of racism, he does that sort of equivalency dance that Jason Kessler and white nationalists want to talk about. They want to stand there and say, well, yes, black people oppress white people just as much and Hispanics oppress us. No, that's not what we're talking about. And so the president has revealed himself to be a bigot. That's not new. That's not surprising. And we have to recognize that the people who are involved in this movement, they're not all townies. They're not all working at Walmart and Target. Jason Kessler went to UVA. A lot of these people are highly educated. That's why they have the khaki pants. So
Stephen Miller went to Duke.
There we go. Stephen Miller went to Duke. So, and I like the fact that UVA's president mentioned, like, yeah, 2 of the organizers graduated from this university. So we have to recognize they're not just dummies. These are sophisticated, organized people who are in this for the long haul. They think the president is on their side, and we have to recognize the danger that they pose as terrorists, not just as mean people.
Well, I never thought of Duke as a great university, but I will agree with you on
Many call it the Princeton of the South.
Well, I'll agree with you on one point. You know, one way in which you often spot anti-Semitism is when people say, well, the Holocaust was a tragedy that involved lots of people, right? That somehow the Jewish aspect of it wasn't central to its nature. And that's exactly what Trump was doing in his tweet. But more than that, he's offering the nation a tweet on the subject, 280 characters. This should be an occasion for a president to go and speak at the Lincoln Memorial, to go and speak somewhere else and deliver a speech, which I don't think Donald Trump in a million years would be capable of delivering, but deliver a speech
the
that says something different.
California fires, you would say this would be an occasion for the president to go there.
Right.
Instead, he's going to rallies.
Right, but let's just point out that the most damning fact about what Donald Trump has done on the year's anniversary is offer the nation that pathetic tweet.
Before we go, the weekend was not without conflict or acts of violence. There were some journalists who were attacked by street protesters. Those protesters were also going after the police. They didn't want to be on camera. They're believed to be part of Antifa. What's your take on this?
You know, I didn't see it. I know one thing when I was in Charlottesville.
Okay, well, there it is. We're seeing it.
Yeah. There were a lot of different activists who were like, why are you in riot gear? We don't see no riot here. There is a belief, I'm not saying it's always correct, but there is a belief by many activists, including Antifa, that the police tacitly support this kind of violence.
Where does that belief come? I mean, well, come on. Do you think the police there were there to protect white nationalists? Do you believe that?
When you look at how the police respond to white nationalists as opposed to Black Lives Matter protesters, yes, you do. When you consider the number of police departments where people have been caught with white nationalist tattoos and the emails and everything else like that, that's there. Look, I never liked the idea of journalists getting attacked, but no one has a reason to believe, even when you look at how the police responded last year, when you look at the fact that they shut down the metro in D.C. that let these guys go in, people have reasons to doubt the police's dedication to eradicating racism.
But thuggishness is thuggishness wherever it comes from politically, and we should be the first to call it out.
I disagree.
This is time for us to rise together. We're going to be right back.